Oh, I guess Morgan. Perfect timing. Just get ready to start. Just get my Okay, so we're just at the bottom of Daf Nalman base by the Tanur Rabbanim. Tanur Rabbanim. Ein mekablan pikdoinos. One should not accept a pikadon, loy min anoshim, not from women, v'loy min avodim, and not from avodim, v'loy min atanoitos. Rashbam tells us the reason for that is the ikala memar. There's a slight chance that gonvum lebaleim ula adoneim. Maybe the wife took this from her husband. She's giving you a Rolex to watch. Maybe the Rolex belonged to her husband, or the Eved is giving you a Rolex to watch. Maybe this Rolex came from the Adoin of this Eved. What about children? It almost sounds like the Rashbam is saying that they're in a foster home. There's no chash that children would steal from their parents, but there is a chash if they were in a foster home that they would take. And therefore, what is the problem with all of these three things? Ultimately, you're helping somebody take this item away from its rightful owner. If you won't take it from them and they have nowhere to put it, then they might give it back. And therefore, you shouldn't aid and abet somebody who might be in the process of a crime. Gewalt. So it seems like the Rashbam says there's no way a child would ever be stealing from his parents, maybe from foster parents. And one of my daughters once got a call from a teacher that her son just bought, her son was just ripped off in a scam. He bought a frog from somebody else in school for $100 cash. I'm talking about a 4-year-old son, the 5-year-old son, my grandson, and he got ripped off because the kid didn't give him the frog. So
was it gold?
So my daughter asked my hey Nicole, where did you get this money from? She says, I found it in the pushka. So I said, you know how much this is? So, I don't know. There's so much in there. I figured that you could, if one is missing, it's not a big deal. So they don't appreciate the value. So I guess you shouldn't take it. If a 6-year-old kid comes and asks you to watch his frog, ask him how much he paid for it. Mm-hmm. So what if Kibol ben the Isha? You accepted the Bikatan from the Isha. Remember, we told you not to be Makabal because maybe it's not hers. So maybe now that you want to come collect it, maybe you shouldn't give it to her. Zokt the Gemara, Zokt the Brisa, Yashar Lisha. You do give it back. As the Rashbam says, V'loy lebal. You don't give it back to the Baal. They know lachzika b'gnevas. We're choshish originally that she stole it and therefore don't help her. But giving it back, it's hers. And a person is not choshid. Person is not choshid. So this concept of the Rashbam of also l'sayeya, it doesn't mean your mom is choshid that they're doing an isser, but you have to stay away from even a potential isser. But she gave it to you. She has a chazaka to be a hadam kosher. Of course, you'd have to give it back there. Okay. However, the mesa, what if she dies? So now you have an object from a woman who gave you a pikadon, and now she died. Who do you give it back to? The halach is yachzer l'bayla. I might be hers. How is it possible for a woman to own something independent of her husband? It's because someone gave it to her. So even if that's what happened, and during her lifetime, it was hers. But Mekivan Shemesa, Yor Shabaila. Once she dies, he ashes her anyway.
What if she had children, sons from a previous marriage?
No, because the first person to yashin her is her husband. Her husband takes precedence over everybody else.
Even if it's her property?
Yeah. Yeah. Her husband always comes first. Is that not a name? No. Okay, I walked here, so I'm hungry. Nikivan Shemesa Yor Shabaila. So her husband is in the first position, the action. Shabal Yor Shesish. He is the first next of kin. The Hilchach, well, he is the next of kin. Hilchach Yachzer Labal. Therefore, he should give it back to the husband. The mimon of shich achshav ereishal baila. No matter whether or not it was hers legitimately or not, right now for sure it would belong to the husband. Okay. The mesa yachshav l'bayla. Kibel mina evet. What if he was makabelet from the evet, and the evet dies? Yeah, so yachshav evet if he's alive. The mes yachshav rabbi. Again, let's have a look in the Rashbam. The mistama kol masha kona evet kona rabbi. You can assume that, though there is still a possibility that the Adam doesn't have a shus in it, but we could still go back to the Adam. But near be'enai, and here's an important Rashbam that many Rishonim argue. The near be'enai to hu adin im nishtacher ha'eved the achakach meis yachsel rabbi. What if the eved was first nishtacher? If when the eved died, he was still in the possession of the other, it makes sense. Masha kon eved kon rabbi, you'll give it to the other. But what if after the eved gave you this Rolex as a pekadon, the eved got freed? The eved got freed. Now this eved is a free man, and then the eved died. Do you still give it back to the other, or maybe then you should give it to the children of the eved, because now this eved is no longer a possession of his other. Zok Rashbam, even if he was freed and then he died, you still give it back to the other. Why? At the time that this person gave you the pekadon, he was an eved. Ustam avodim gazlonin. And a stam eved is a gazlan. So you see, there's a very big distinction between yachsir labayla by a wife and yachsir larabbi by another. By a wife, we assume she's not lying. We assume she's legit. And therefore, the reason why it goes to her husband is because he yarshens her. Here, the reason why it goes to the other is because we believe it actually belongs to the other. In this garsha, what if the woman died and then, what if the woman was divorced and then she died? Like Avigdor said, now it's lachshul yersher, now her husband's no longer a Yerush. So it actually would go to her children. The Mishan is garsha, once she is migureshes, ein habal Yerusha. The Baal is not Yerusha anymore. She's an independent woman. We assume she didn't steal it. We assume it belonged to her, and therefore it will go to her next of kin. But by an Eved, it does not go to his next of kin, Zokt derashpam, because we assume he stole it.
Stam Gazlanim, Stam
Right. I'm sorry?
Avodim Gazlanim, is that because the reason that they're an Eved is because they stole?
Oh, I didn't even, I thought we were talking about an Eved Knaini.
Oh.
I thought we were talking about an Eved Knaini. I don't think you say Mashakona Evet Kana Bailai by Evet Ivri. I think you only say it by Nevet Knani.
Okay.
So I think this is along with the big arichas in the Rishonim, because where did the Rashbam get this from? There's no indication in the Gemara at all to make this distinction between whether or not the Evet was freed before he died or not. And the Rashbam is literally fabricating this from his own knowledge. I'm sure he's a very trustworthy source, but the Rashbam is making this up. It's not from the Gemara. It's his own das that you assume that the Eved lied. You assume the Eved was a Gazlan. It does not say that anywhere here. There are Rishonim who argue on him. The Tosfos Rid asks, where does he get this from? Mechatesa. The Ritva comes a little bit to the defense of the Rashbam, and the Ritva says, let me think. The Ritva says over here there's a special reason why you wouldn't trust the Eved. And I don't remember what it was, but there's a special reason why you wouldn't trust Eved. Okay, gewaltig. But this is an important thing to mention because it's a very controversial halacha that the Rashbam shares with us. What about Kibel Menakot? Now we're on Nafnun Beis Amar. Your Mekabel Menakot, he was also one of the three people that you were not supposed to accept a cotton from. So you can't give it back. Why can't you give it back? You're going to give something of value back to a child. He's going to destroy it. Giving it back to a child is like throwing it in the garbage. Someone who gives it back to a child. So the right thing to do is, what you should do is you should preserve what he gives you in the best possible fashion until this child is old enough to be responsible, and then you can give it back to him. The command of from my school. And there's of course a shaila what there's a shaila, of course. What's the reason for Yasal Iskula? Pashas, you should be able to put it back to where you took it from. You took it from the cotton. So most people learn it's not that he wouldn't be Mekayim Eschiva Shova if he gave it back to the cotton, but it's more like Hashava Saved Labaylam, you're supposed to try to help preserve other people's money. Vimes, what if the cotton dies? Rashi says, then Yasir Yarshav, you will give it to the Yarshim, because Yarshim are adults, and therefore it's responsible to give it them. V'chulun sha'amru, who are these v'chulun sha'amru? So the Rashbam says, afilu cotton. That means either an Isha, or an Eved, or a cotton. V'chulun sha'amru, v'shas misasan, till ployniheg, they're about to die, and they declare, this belongs to Yankel. So the halach is they're trusted, Yasek Pirushon, you could do exactly what they told you to do. Now, the Rashbam sticks in Vafilu Katan because this is also a matter of a big question. If a 3-year-old kid who's dying tells you it belongs to Yankel, you're going to believe me? That's what we're talking about. So there's actually a little bit of a shaila, how old of a child we're talking about. The Rashbam seems to hold, we're talking about someone who's a child who's more mature, not a little baby. But other Rishonim learn that it even applies to babies over here, and therefore this halach of Yasek Kibrushan does not apply to them because they don't really know what you're talking about. Let's see what the Rashbam says. B'shas misason. It's not only b'shas misason, they should always be able to be trusted as to who belongs to. Zot Rashbam b'shas misason is lavdavke. It's urcha de milson nakat. It can change brian because if they were healthy, then you would be returning it directly to them. Im roitzim lahachser lebaylim yitlu shalahen miyara nifkad yachser lebaylen. If they wanted it to go back to Yankel, they could just go and ask you to give it to them back, and then they can give it themselves. The Malahen legalis over. Why do they have to say who belongs to? They could do it themselves. Here, they're in a scenario. Where's a typical scenario where they wouldn't be in the position to be able to return it themselves if they were sick and died? And Yasek Ibrushan, Yachsar Nifkad, Loiset Ploni, Shapir Shureli. You can give it back to those people. And there's a shaila where this special naimonus comes from. Either because when someone's about to die, there's something called the matna shrivnara. It's we say it's kichsum v'chasum domi. If a shrivnara says, I want my field to go to so and so, it goes. Why does it go? The reason why we say is because if it won't go, if my will won't be fulfilled, it'll cause stress to the person who's in a very bad situation, and that could push him over the edge. We want to help calm this person down. But here, there might be a story that those who don't learn Urcha Dimel Samakat, they learn the reason why Yasek Kiprushan is someone, as he's about to face his maker, is likely to say the truth. As well as the other svara of Divrei Shchivara. We don't want to upset them, so we do what they tell them to do.
What's the condition? If it's in their possession, they could have returned it. If it's not in their possession, it's found, and they say, "Oh, that belongs."
No, it's not found. They're dying, and the nifkat still has it, and they tell you, by the way, I'm dying. You know, it really belongs to Blanc I'll give it back.
Right, so what is the why is this any different than the previous one?
I mean, why is
learning from this?
If I can give it to them, why can't I give it to the person who they say it belongs to? I hear.
What's the Havamim?
I hear. Okay, so let's. It could be it's the Vimlav Yasha Pierce the Perusa. It could be this is just a segue into the next halacha. So that's a very good point. If you would give it back to them, why wouldn't you give it to the person that they say it belongs to? And it's a very good point. But here it's talking about someone right before he dies, he does things. There was a minig, I think it's brought down to the Chachmas Adam, so that would have been probably in the 1600s. So the 1600s, probably the 1600s. He writes that there was a minig that if someone got sick for 3 days, not on their deathbed, if someone was sick, he had a flu, he had a cold, if he was sick for 3 days, then the Chaver Kedisha and the Rov would come visit him. And the first thing they would say is, "We're not here because you're about to die."
There's a joke. There's a guy who comes to Paris. And he schmoozes with the residents. And we always joke. He's trying to get into Yerusha. So mamish, if it's mamish, he's going to discuss Misa.
I hear it.
People who hang out maybe on the Bika Cola.
I will tell you. I will tell you something afterwards. It's not a joke. It's not a joke. There's a real estate agent in Los Angeles who wants the listing of the house from my mother-in-law's house. Her husband works for Musaskin, and that's how they roll. He's so good. I was asking that my brother-in-law. I'm not involved in it at all. My brother says he's so good for us. How could I not give his wife the listing? So it's exactly that. And another firm agent who actually I'm related to wanted the listing. So he said, "Listen, my brother-in-law's taking care of it." And my brother wants to give it to this girl because of her husband was asking. So she says, "Yeah, that's how they roll. That's their modus operandi." So you're saying good. You're saying good. So anyway, they had this meeting. They come in. If a person was sick for 3 days, the first thing they'll tell them is, "Don't worry, you're not about to die." Then they'll tell them, "It's a very big skula to do tshuva," and they would say vidui with him, and they would ask him, "Do you owe money to anybody?" That's why it's not yet here. Yashik Pirushon. Do you owe money to anybody? Let us know so that we'll be able to pay back all your debts. Does anybody owe you money that we'll be able to get for your next of kin? We'll be able to get that money back. But don't worry. You're not about to the contrary. Most of the people who say vidu end up becoming healthy. You don't want to spook them. And the Chacham says, and those places where it's not a minute to do this, it's also gomer to do this because you can spook a guy. So I think Heshi Nussbaum told me that he was once in the hospital with his father. His father wasn't well, and Dave Zolti came to visit him, and Bubuzlanik, and all of the members of the Chevra Kadisha came to visit. So as Heshi sees him coming down the hall, he tells his father, "Look, Tati, the Chevra Kadisha came to get you." Dave, please correct me if what I'm saying is inaccurate. But that's the story that Heshi
tells. But it was more interesting than that. We're walking down the hall and says, "Oh yeah, the Chevra Kadishas do. Tata, the Chevra Kadisha." That was Heshi Nussbaum, Mordechai Nussbaum.
Listen, when my grandfather was in the hospice, he had a roommate, and one day the Chevra Kadisha comes in and starts to take his roommate, and his roommate's moving nine. So they're so desensitized there. Okay, but today came in next to we'll come back next week. Anyway, vim loy zok the Gemara, vim lav, what vim lav? If what not? We're going to see in a second. Yasher perish leperush. So what does it mean in vim lav? The Rashbam learns. There's a shiloh over here. There's a long Rashbam. There's different sheetas, but the Rashbam's main shot is kloimer vim loy mehemet. Let's say you have a reason not to trust the nifkad. Not to trust the mafkid. You have reason not to trust this woman, not to trust this Eved, not to trust this child. You have strong reason to believe that this really belongs to either her husband or the Eved's owner or the parents. She's embarrassed. I stole this Rolex from my husband. I'm embarrassed to say that it belongs to my husband because I'm basically admitting that I'm a thief. So if that's what the mafkid senses, which means he has to use his seichel, then yasa nifkad perish achar leperusha. The nifkad should explain what they meant. When she said Yanko, she really meant her husband. Where do you find such a thing? We're going to see in a moment with a story that the Gemara is going to quote by the wife of Rabbi Bar Chana. That if you know that what they're telling you is not correct, or you have the sixth sense, you could tell something's fishy here, then avada you would give it back to the person who you assume it belongs. In love, Yasa Paris Lapirush. And now the Gemara illustrates this with a story. The Bishop of Rabbi Bar Chana, the wife of Rabbi Bar Chana passed away. Before she died, she went through her jewelry. She said, "Hana, keep me these rings. I think these keep your nose rings, or they're just maybe earrings. These earrings, you know, they belong to Marta, Ubnei Barta. They belong to Marta and his grandchildren, the sons of his daughters. Also, the Rav. So her husband came to Rav. Rabbi Bar Chana came to Rav to say, "Am I supposed to listen to her? Maybe they're mine." If you trust your wife and you don't think that she stole them, then asay kipirusha. Then do just like what she said. However, vimloi, if you suspect that these are not really those persons, asay pirish lepirusha. You're allowed to explain what it is that she meant, meaning you can keep it for yourself. The Ikadamri, there are those who say that this is what Rav told Rabbi Barachana, if the people who she claims they belong to, meaning Marta and his grandchild and his grandsons, if in fact they're wealthy people, and it makes sense that they would have such expensive jewelry, then I say kipirusha. The loy, I say pierce the brusha, you're allowed to keep it. There's another pshat in Amid Lach that Rashbam brings, and that is if she's wealthy, meaning if you have a reason to believe that she might have received gifts, that these could belong to her, or if you know that she was very trustworthy amongst people, and it's likely that people would have given it to her as a pekadon, then you could trust her. But other than that, you're allowed to keep and assume it was hers that you owned, and she didn't have. It wasn't a pekadon, and there wasn't a gift that was given to her that excluded her husband's ownership. The Brisa told us earlier that you should not return a pekadon to a child. Rather, you should put it away for safekeeping. My school, exactly what should one do with it? You should buy a Sefer Torah. Buy something that the child could benefit from in Ruchnius, yet it will still retain its value. Rabbi Barbahuna Amar, Dikla, it should be something that provides Gashmis. The Alchamin Tamer, you can eat its dates, yet the tree remains forever and it will preserve the wealth of the child. The Rashbam says, note, it doesn't say cryptocurrency. You're not allowed to put it into an investment. You're only allowed to put it into rock solid places. Let's have a look at the Heilige Rashbam. The Achal, her Sefer Torah is Lil Moy Boy, Hare Paris, because you learn Torah, Karen Kayemes, and the Karen is Kai. There is a big question as to whether or not this includes Svarim. The Ritva says about this includes Svarim, anything that the child can learn from that will remain forever. I would add that nowadays it wouldn't contain Svarim, because we all know that we have the most beautiful Svarim that we had when we were Yeshiva Rachim. And then when our sons lead they need a Chemsayv, they need a Keveger, you say, sure, I have one. They open it up, they make a face and says, this, it's so old. The print is so terrible. I want the latest and the greatest, right? I have beautiful sets of the Krois Gedelos Chamashim. My kid looks at it. This, I want a Isvahadar. I want a new art scroll. So nowadays, Svarim mamash lose their value. I know that my shver are so many Svarim, you can't do anything with them. All you could really do once a sefer is more than 10 years old is put it into Shemus. So nowadays it could apply maybe to a Sefer Torah, which retains its value, and the child can learn from it. The other sheet is, no, he has to have financial benefit from it, and it has to be rock solid, safe. The Achamini Akot Tomri, Karen Kayim, Abul Be'iska, but no stocks. You're not allowed to buy stocks, get involved in anything that even has the slightest bit of risk. Loy. Shema Yeraba, Dover Takala V'Teva. Because the stock market can crash, and the child's money will be lost.
What do they do today? A situation where somebody with a Tottenham has, I'm unlikely to have.
Well, they usually put them into very safe investments.
You would put it into an annuity or government bond.
You have to understand, in those days, Iska versus today, a T-bill, there might be a difference between those two. Zok Gemara weiter. V'loy la'av b'nichsei ben, v'loy leben b'nichsei av, because either one won't be makbid if the other one is in their property, and therefore they can never make a chazak. Amr Yosef, afilu cholku, even if they actually split up, meaning the father and the son's on his own. The son's married, he's on his own business. Do you still say that? Or maybe only when they're working together? Rav Amar, I'm sorry, Rabbi Yosef, maybe he's not saying it with her Shaila, could be saying it with her Nichasa. I thought it was a question, but no, the response is not bitmi. I forget it. Rabbi Yosef holds, even if they're split up, there's still that love between a father and a son that they wouldn't be makbid on each other. Rav Amar Chol Kuloi. Rav said no. Once their financial affairs are separated, in fact, there would be a reason to be moicha, and there would be a chazak. Chol Kuloi. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah B'Difti. Avad Rav Papi Uvda Chol Kuloi Karav. Rav Papi had a question that came to him where there was a chazaka from a father to a son or from a son to a father, and Rav Papi acknowledged the chazaka. Amar Nachman Yitzchak Ishtoili Rav Chia Me Hormiz Ardishid. Rav Chia from Hormiz Ardishid. Hormiz Ardishid was a city. It's a city in eastern. It's a city far east in Iran. This is actually a city, I think, in the eastern Iran, which was a big tourist center back in the day. The Stoile, and it was called Hermes Erdeshit because of the king who built it. It was a city of commerce. It was a big city. It's still in business today. The Stoile Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Mishmei Rav Nachman Bar Yaakov. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov told him in the name of Rav Nachman Bar Yaakov that Cholku Loi, which is exactly how Rav Papi Pasket, the Hilchas of Cholku Loi, if they are no longer in the same business, then they would have a chazaka one and another. Tanya Mihachi, Ben Shechalak, the Ishto Shenis Garsha, Harayan Kishar Kalodam, and they can surely make a chazaka on each other. Itmar Zak Gemar. Echad Mina Achin, Shahaya Noise V'Noisein V'Soichabayis. What would happen if you had a group of Yisraelim, the father died, he left over a bunch of children, and normally the oldest son, he's the one who's going to manage the affairs. So you had the oldest son over here. I don't think the oldest is Lavdaka, but that's the one who it would typically be. Typically, it would be the oldest who would be involved in dealing with the financial affairs. And what happened was he was wheeling and dealing in business. There were oinois, meaning deeds of properties that he bought, and there were shtarais, money that he lent out. And the shtar says that Reuven bought this property, that Reuven lent the money. So do we assume that this is money from the estate that he has to share with his brothers? Or the Amar Shaliyam, he said, no, this money did not come from the estate. This is my own personal money, and I don't have to share this with my brothers. How do I have personal money that doesn't belong to my brothers? So naflali mi beis avi im. I yashed this from my mother. So these were all brothers who shared a father, but they didn't necessarily share a mother. So this brother says, I got this from my mother. You are all from a different mother. This has nothing to do with the estate of my father, and therefore you have no sharing. So the question is, what is the assumption? So Amarav, all of Lahavi right. It's not looking good. Since he knows where his money comes from, it's incumbent on him to bring a raya, in fact, that it's his money and it's not money that belongs to the estate. Shmuel Amar, no. He has a star that's written to his name, and therefore Allah Achin Lahavi Rai. The assumption is that it's his, and if they want to claim that this is the money that belongs to them, to the estate, they would have to prove so. Amar Shmuel, Zok Shmuel, who we normally pass like, in Nilchos Choshen Mishpat, but today will be an exception. Moideli Abba Emes, if the brother died, and now it's the brother's children who are dealing with this, and the question is, does this property belong to the brother's children, or does it belong to the estate? Then Allah Achin Lahavi Rai. So therefore, even though Rav holds that when the brother is alive, he has to prove that it belongs to him, once he dies, his children don't have to prove that it belongs to them. Break the Gemara, Maskav La Republic. Why should it make a difference? Klum Tanin Lahu Liasmi Midi the Laitan Lahu Avoin. I don't understand. If the father said it's mine, he's not believed. So how do the children get a bigger right in these properties, in this loan, than their father had? Their father didn't have it in such a strong way that he wouldn't need to prove that it was his. So why do the children have that benefit? I see from Avigdor's face that he's thinking, what do you mean? Don't we have a rule of Tanin and Lisoimim? So there is such a Taina. And we're going to see the Rashbam, how he deals with that problem. But the Kasha wasn't over. Our Papa is saying, you never give these Soimim a schus that their own father didn't have. Because the Harava Apek Zuzu the Sarbala, the Safar Dagadata, Miyasmi, Veloy Raya, the Dvorim Hasuyim Lahashul Lahask. We know that sometimes, even though you have an item in your possession, you're not considered a muhsin. When is that? If what you have in your possession are things that are normally lent out. So a Zugu de Sarbala is a some type of shear that they use to shear wool with, and Sefer Dagadata are Svarim of Agadata, which people do lend out. The normal sperm that use every day, they don't lend out. They need them. But Sifrei Dagat that aren't used regularly, people do lend out. So things that it's normal to find my item in your Rishos, that I lent it to you, there the fact that it's in your Rishos is no right. So we had these Yisoimim who had these items, and someone comes along, Reuben comes along and says, that's not yours and that wasn't your father's. I lent it to him. So there, and what happened? They took it away from the Yisoimim. Rava took it away from the Yisoimim. So you see clearly that the Yisoimim don't have any more rights to it than the father.
Guaranteed that if the venture had lost money, it would have come to the
So let's have a look. Let's have a look at the Rishbam, how the Rishbam deals with this problem of Toyanin Liyisoimim. So let's have a look at the Rishbam. Kolum Tanini Luli Yasmi, something that the father doesn't have. Bitmiya, Ilu Hayavi and Kayim, if the father was alive, Hayunu Machsikin Amaman Biad Achin, Ach Yavi Raishan Shalem. By default, we would have taken the property away from this brother, and we would have assumed that it belonged to the estate. Ulufisha Mace, just because he dies, Yofa Koichin Shal Yisoimim Imenu, Biafsidu Achin, just because he dies, that makes his children in a stronger position than he himself was, to the detriment of the estate. Bitmiya, that doesn't make sense. The Avagav Damrinon, Frank the Rishbam, but what do you mean? We just learned on Daf Memalef Mudbeis, Anin Liirish. If I yarshin something from my father and I'm sitting in this property for 3 years, we tell you that the father would have bought it. Even though the father was only there one day, the father did not have a chazaka. And the Yosem, after the father died, the Yosem was there for 3 years with no ma'ayr, then havi chazaka, we consider it a chazaka. The father would not have been believed with the chazak of 3 years to say that he bought it. He would have to have a taina explain how it's his, either atamachartaloi or atanasata. Yet the children could keep it, even though they don't say atamachartai, atanasata. They just know that their father had it. Yet they don't have the taina that determines where it came from. And there, you do say that for them. All I have to know is that my father had it. I don't have to know the origins of how my father got it. So here you see that the child has a greater right than his father.
Are we just assuming the father would have timed that? Had it been available? We would have asked him.
That's correct.
He would have made a time. He would have accepted the time.
So you're making that distinction. That's what he answers. That's the response there. It's beautiful. Limited. So you see from here, you'll make a tanya on behalf of the Yisraelim that the father couldn't have tanya. The father couldn't have gotten away with saying, I just have it. He would have had to explain. Yet the children don't have to. Loidami, there's no comparison. The Asam Nami ain't tanya b'shvil Yisraelim ela shavin kana minama ayr k'moy shahaya hu ab yachalitan. Again, the father himself could have tanya that. We're tanning for the Yisraelim something that the father could have said. Yes, if the father doesn't say anything, and they don't say anything, they don't get it. But since the father could have said this taina, we'll make a taina behalf of the Yisraelim. The father could have said. Well, the ficha have a chazaka, even though the Yisraelim don't know the origins of how their father got it. He would never be able to say by default it's mine. You prove that it's not. He would have to pull out a raya, and therefore, how could we give the Yisraelim this advantage that they don't have?
How do we end up? It's not good. We don't give these.
Allah Alamaisa.
It seems like the Rashbam makes the argument.
Well, the Gemara, that's what our Papa is saying. How is it that you can give the children an advantage? So Shmuel said that Rav would agree to me that if this fellow died, his children have the advantage. And Papa asked on Shmuel, how could you say Rav would agree? There's no reason why Rav should agree. According to Rav, there should be no difference if it's the brother or if it's his next of kin. Kidishalach Rav Huna bar Avin, just like Rav Avin taught us, and this is still part of the kasha, why the case that we just quoted with the items that you could borrow, that dvarim asuim lahashul hasker, if I have something of yours that you would normally lend to me, and I claim that I bought it from you, I'm not considered a Muslim. Zok Gemara kasha, the Gemara remains with the kasha. Now the question is, does that mean Shmuel is Augushlagan or not? So the Rashbam has something very interesting. He's a long Rashbam, I'm not going to go through it all. But he said when it says kasha, it doesn't mean tiyufta. It means it's fair. We don't. I mean, I happen not to know the territory right now, but it doesn't mean He's Augustlogin. Shmuel is not Augustlogin. But the Rashbam also brings Shittus all that Kash and Tiyufta mean the same thing, and he is Augustlogin. Lamaisa, what is the teretz? The teretz that the Rishonim answer is that really the brother is Nemon to say it's his. Even though Rav says he has to bring a raya, the brother himself has to bring a raya that it's his, not because Ba'etzim he has to. Really, Meikra didn't it's his. But since he's in the position to bring a raya, because he knows how he got it, he should have documents, we'll ask him to verify. Once he's not around, we can't ask him to verify. So we will go according to the Stam Muhsa. Halacha l'maisa, we are going to see that we paskin not like Shmuel. Let me just have a look over here. If we look at the last of the four top lines, upasuk of Hananel, the Hilchazuk of Shmuel, the Gemis ala Achan Labiraya, the Chain Pirsh, Aktimir Aboisazal, and then he goes on because it's still with Robert Augustlogin, but then he says, V'had Shmuel nir be'enai, the lois of China lakalikar, we don't rely on him. The Chaim Pishrach, Kotav me Goin, Kizeh Sham Shmuel, Umoidli Abba, Shemeis Alach Labiraya, Ein Alach Kamoisa. Oh no, Lagabidat, Ein Alach Kamoisa. But I think we do pass like Rav in this case. I think the Rishbam mentioned the number of Amar Chista, Loi Shanu, Elod Ein Chalukin Bi'isas. When do we say that the brother has to bring a raya? That's if they do everything together, they even eat together. Abu Chalukin Bi'isasan, but if each guy got his own dough to prepare into his own food, then even Rav would agree that I'm nemon to say it was mine, because Amor me'isasai kibbutz. Where did he get the money? You might ask where he got the money from. You know where he got the money from? He put away, instead of eating his full allotment, he cut away a little bit each time, and that's how he built the money to buy it. Now this is just a svara, because Hanomar Aleph, the Gemara says beferish, his taina is that he got it, he yashined it from his mother, right? So the Rishbam says this is a svara in addition that's being offered, but that's not really the reason. He was very thrifty, and he didn't eat all of the food. That's how he became wealthy. He had money. So I don't think it's a steer. It's like the famous story with this child who asked his uncle, his old wealthy uncle, how he became wealthy, right? So his uncle said, I grew up during the Depression, and there was no money at all. And I went out and I worked for weeks and weeks until I was able to put away an extra penny. And I went out to the fields and I went to a farmer, and for 1 penny I bought an apple, and I shined it up and I buffed it up. And then I went downtown and I found someone who was hungry, and I sold him the apple for 2 pennies. With those 2 pennies, I didn't waste them. I ran back to the farm. I bought 2 apples, and then I sold them for 4 pennies. And after 2 weeks, I had already accumulated 25 cents. And then my rich uncle died and left me $1 million. So it's mamish this case. He started off by cutting away a little bit of his dough, putting it away, and then his grandfather died, and he became wealthy. So it's not a steer. It's the same. It's the same thing. That's right. So I'm because the raya b'mai. We said that he has to bring a raya that it's his. How exactly is this brother supposed to bring a raya that it's his? What is the proof that would be acceptable? Rab Amar Raya be'edim. He has to have edim that say specifically that it was his. Zokt the Rashbam. What does it mean? Al Bal Ashtar. This brother has to bring a raya. The me'isasa kimates. He actually has to bring a raya edim that he was always putting away. Oy ma'avi ima yarash. Or your mom and stars halal shaloi. He actually has to bring a raya on every detail of his claim. Perhaps Sheshes Amar no. Raya b'kiyam shtar. All he has to do is do a kiyam on the shtar. The shtar says that he bought this property. The shtar says that he lent this money out. If Bezdin were Mekayim the shtar, they would never have been Mekayim a shtar that says that he bought this property if he was buying it on behalf of the estate. They would have made sure that the shtar is fully accurate and would have explained that he's buying it on behalf of the estate. If the shtar just says he bought it, that in and of itself is enough of a raya. He doesn't need to have Adam that followed him around his whole life and know how he made his money. Amalei Rav Rav Nachman, Harav, Shmuel. We have a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Do we believe the brother, like Shmuel says, or do we make the brother prove that the wealth was actually his? We have that side. And then even in Rav, we have a machlokes. Rav says the brother has to prove that it belongs to him. We have a machlokes to what extent he needs to prove it. Harabba, Harab Sheshes. Right? Rav said you need mamash araya that could determine exactly where his wealth came from. Rab Sheshes says it's enough just to get a kima star. So he asked, what exactly? So Rav asked Rav Nachman, Mar, come on, really. So how do we pass? There's so many shittas over here. How do we pass? Amalei, I know masnisi yadan. I know this brisa, and that's what I follow. The Tanya echad min achin sheyinoisei v'noisei sheyinoisei v'noisei v'soich habayis v'yuoinos ushtoris yoitzin al shlomoy v'omar shalihein shenaflu li mi beis avi ima. So this is the brisa, exactly the case that we're discussing. Allah lavi raya. He passes like Rav. Rav said he has to bring a raya. So we have a raya like Rav, but we don't have a raya. What type of raya yet? Right? We still need to know what type of raya does he need. Is that enough just to be kind of star, or does he need Adam that followed him around his whole life and know where he got his money from? We'll see about that. She noises when they tell the what if the almana is also running the affairs of the assignment? She's running the affairs of the estate, and she had stories that are made out to her personally. And she claims this is not estate money. This is my personal money. Either from my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, or from my maternal grandfather. It doesn't matter. Allah lahavi raya. She has to prove, in fact, that that's where it came. It's mashma that it's a bigger chiddush by an isha that she has to bring a raya than the brother. By the brothers, okay, we know you got to bring a raya, but even a wife has to bring a raya. Why would she be different? She should be exactly the same. The Amri Katarcha Kamayasmi Loigos. She is very, very flattered that she was entrusted by the estate, by Bezdin, to be in control of all assets. That's very flattering. So you might think, since she was so flattered and she's so proud to take care of the assignment, she's the last person who would steal from the assignment. She should have a higher level of nemanus, kamash malon, that even her, she has to prove that anything that she has that she claims is not part of the estate, she has to be able to prove. Let's have a look at the Rashbam. Masnisi Yadana. So this is what Rav said. This is what Rav Nachman said. How I know the paskin. Masnisi Yadana Karav. I have a bride that says befeirs that this brother does have to prove, in fact, that the assets are his alone, just like the wife would have to do as well. However, but that part of the shiloh was never clarified to what extent you need a raya. Rabbeinu Chanan pasak be'edim tzarech lahavi raya v'loy b'kimish. Rabbeinu Chanan pasak is l'chumra, like Rab Sheshes, that I'm sorry, not like Rab Sheshes. Who said you have to bring edim? It was, I think, Rabbah, right? It was Rabbah who says that you need a raya be'edim. Yes, Rabbah said be'edim, and that's how Rabbeinu Chanan paskins you need be'edim. The hafilu Rab Sheshes might need the raya be'edim shaviyosem b'kimish. Rab Sheshes says Mekel says kimish is enough, but I'll surely agree that raya be'edim is superior. So we're going to default to the thing that everyone agrees to. So here's where you see Allah L'maisa, we're paskening like Rav Nachman paskening like Rav, which is not like Shmuel. So we're going against the general rule that normally in the Neimanis we pasken like Shmuel, and in this case we're paskening like Rav because we have a brisa to support it. So if you remember, at this point we were transitioning from talking about the chazaka of Raya, the chazaka that proved that you purchased this, and the chazaka that's actually a kinyan. So, Frank the Gemara, it says, why are we listing off some specific cases of transactions? But only these things are chazaka, nothing else. Any type of sale transaction, not only why are we saying that this chazaka only applies to those people? Zaktimar, you're right. We have to amend this mission. All this that we talked about, the chazak of 3 years that applies to some people and not the others, that's b'chazaka sheishi matayna. That's the type of chazaka that's supporting a claim that you bought it. That's where the chazaka of 3 years applies, that the Mishnah was discussing who could make a chazaka and who cannot make a chazaka. But a chazaka without a taina, meaning not the chazaka of a raya, the chazaka of kinyan. The purpose of this chazaka is not to prove anything. It's just to actually make a kinyan, to make a transaction. Let me just see what the Bach says in Ois Aleph. The boy, they need no godar uparat kolshu or chazak. If you lock a door, you put a fence up, or you make an opening in the fence, and the Gemara is going to tomorrow tell us exactly how much work you need to do. That will be the kinyan of chazak. Tanya Hoshia, Kedushin Devei Levi. Kedushin Devei Levi are brises that Levi accumulated in Maseches Kedushin. So that book of brises was called Kedushin Devei Levi. It says Noah, Godar, Parat, Kolshu, Bifanov, if this was done in front of the person that you're taking the property away from, Harezu Chazaka, it would be a Chazaka. Bifanovin, Shaloi Bifanov Loi. But if it was not in front of the seller, it wouldn't work. Here we're saying it works even by Nichse Ager. By Nichse Ager, there is no Bifanov. There's no one there. So it's mashma from Kedushin Devei Levi. It's only if you do these activities in front of the person that you're being kinded from. But from us, it's mashma not. If I'm buying a property from you, and then I just go in front of you and make a chazaka, do a null, do a god, do a parat, even if you don't say a word, if it's done in front of you, that's a sure sign that you're willing to give up the property, you're selling it, and I'm being kind. But if I'm there and you're not watching me, so how do we know that you're having in mind to be makneh to me when I take it? So therefore, it's only a kinyan if I instruct you, go make a chazaka on my property and be kind. There, if you make a chazaka, no matter where you do it, it will be considered a good kinyan, and that's what we'll elaborate on tomorrow.
Need him to say that